Sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in plain sight, dismissed by those who should know better. In a world where voices are often judged before they're truly heard, where assumptions cloud reality, and where the most powerful moments come from the most unexpected places, one woman's journey would shatter every preconceived notion about who deserves respect and attention. This is the story of how a single radio transmission would stop an admiral in his tracks and change the course of naval history forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Communications Center as Sarah Chen adjusted her headset for what seemed like the 1,000th time that week. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, creating an almost hypnotic backdrop to the constant chatter of radio transmissions that filled the air. She had been working the overnight shift for 3 months now, and the isolation of those quiet hours had become both her sanctuary and her burden. Sarah was 24 years old, fresh out of communications school, and assigned to one of the Navy's most critical monitoring stations on the West Coast. But despite the importance of her role, she felt invisible. The other operators, mostly seasoned veterans with years of experience, barely acknowledged her presence.
During shift changes, conversations would die down when she approached, and her suggestions during briefings were met with polite nods that clearly indicated no one was really listening.
It wasn't that she was incompetent, far from it. Sarah had graduated at the top of her communications class and had an almost supernatural ability to pick up signals that others missed. Her hearing was exceptionally acute, and she could distinguish between different radio signatures like a musician identifying instruments in an orchestra. But in a male-dominated environment where experience was valued above all else, her youth and quiet demeanor made her easy to overlook. The communications center operated around the clock, monitoring naval traffic across the Pacific. Ships would check in regularly, reporting their positions and status. Submarine patrols would send coded messages. Coast Guard vessels would coordinate rescue operations. It was a symphony of voices that most operators learned to filter and prioritize based on urgency and importance. Sarah, however, listened to everything with equal attention. Her colleagues found this habit amusing, even irritating. During busy periods, they would tell her to focus on priority channels and ignore the routine chatter. But Sarah couldn't bring herself to tune out completely. Every voice on those radio waves represented real people, often in challenging or dangerous situations, and she felt a responsibility to hear them all. This particular morning had started like any other. The night shift supervisor, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, barely looked up from his paperwork when Sarah arrived. He was a career Navy man, 3 years from retirement, who had long ago decided that the overnight shift was where careers went to die. He treated the assignment as a necessary evil and the junior operators as temporary inconveniences. Sarah settled into her station and began her routine equipment checks. The banks of radio equipment hummed and crackled with activity. She adjusted frequencies, tested backup systems, and reviewed the night's message logs. Everything appeared normal, but something felt different in the static. There was an unusual pattern in the background noise that she couldn't quite identify. As the morning progressed, routine communications flowed through the center. A destroyer reported its position 200 miles offshore. A supply ship requested permission to change course due to weather conditions. A patrol boat confirmed a scheduled maintenance check. Sarah logged each transmission with mechanical precision, but part of her attention remained focused on that strange pattern in the static. It was during a brief lull in radio traffic that she first heard it clearly. Hidden beneath layers of atmospheric interference and competing signals was a faint transmission. The signal was weak, almost lost in the background noise, and transmitted on emergency frequency that was rarely used. Most operators would have dismissed it as equipment malfunction or atmospheric disturbance. But Sarah's trained ear detected something different. The pattern wasn't random. It was deliberate, structured, following the rhythm of Morse code but transmitted in a way that suggested extreme urgency and possibly limited power. Someone was trying to communicate, and they were using every available technique to break through the interference. She isolated the frequency and began the painstaking process of cleaning up the signal. Using specialized filtering equipment, she slowly stripped away layers of static and interference. What emerged was a voice transmission, heavily distorted but definitely human. The speaker was female, young, and despite the technical difficulties, her words carried an unmistakable authority. The call sign she used was one that Sarah had never heard before. According to all official records, no vessel or unit was currently operating under that designation. But the voice continued transmitting, providing coordinates and requesting immediate assistance for what appeared to be a maritime emergency involving multiple vessels and potential casualties. Sarah faced a dilemma. Protocol dictated that she should report any unusual transmissions to her supervisor for verification and classification. But Lieutenant Commander Hayes had made it clear on numerous occasions that he didn't appreciate being disturbed for anything less than a confirmed emergency. The transmission was too garbled for her to determine its exact nature, and she knew that Hayes would likely dismiss it as equipment malfunction. She decided to continue monitoring the frequency while attempting to establish clearer contact with the mysterious caller. Using her station's powerful transmission equipment, Sarah began broadcasting on the same emergency frequency, asking for clarification and offering assistance. For several minutes, there was no response, except for the continued background static. Then, suddenly, the voice came through with startling clarity. The speaker had apparently found a way to boost her signal strength, and her words cut through the interference like a knife through fog. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she heard the most professional, authoritative radio communication she had ever encountered. The unknown operator provided precise coordinates for what she described as a developing crisis involving 3 vessels in distress. She gave detailed information about weather conditions, sea state, and the specific nature of the emergency. Her communication style was flawless, following every protocol while conveying urgent information with remarkable efficiency. But what struck Sarah most was the confidence in that voice. This was someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Sarah quickly plotted the coordinates on her navigation charts. The location was in open ocean, approximately 400 miles west of their position, in an area that, according to official records, should have been empty of naval traffic. Yet the mysterious caller was providing real-time updates about a complex maritime emergency that required immediate attention from the highest levels of naval command. The implications were staggering. If the transmission was genuine, lives were at stake and time was running out. If it was some kind of hoax or training exercise that hadn't been properly coordinated, Sarah could face serious consequences for raising a false alarm. But as she listened to the steady professionalism of the unknown voice, she became convinced that this was real. She began documenting everything, recording the transmissions and carefully noting all details provided by the mysterious caller. The information was precise and consistent, suggesting someone with extensive naval training and experience. The speaker knew naval terminology, proper radio procedure, and seemed to have access to sophisticated communication equipment despite the initial signal difficulties. As the morning progressed, the situation described by the unknown caller appeared to be escalating. She reported changing weather conditions that were complicating rescue efforts, and provided updates on the status of personnel involved in the emergency. Her transmissions came at regular intervals, each one professionally delivered despite what must have been extremely challenging circumstances. Sarah found herself completely absorbed in the developing crisis. She had forgotten about the routine base operations around her and was focused entirely on maintaining contact with the voice in the static. Other operators occasionally glanced her way, noting her intense concentration, but none showed enough interest to ask what was capturing her attention so completely. The breakthrough came when the mysterious caller provided additional information that allowed Sarah to cross-reference the emergency with other intelligence sources. Using the base's classified databases, she discovered references to a special operations exercise that had been classified at the highest levels. The coordinates matched, the timing was consistent, and suddenly everything began to make sense. This wasn't just any emergency transmission. The voice belonged to someone involved in a highly classified naval operation, and the emergency was real. Sarah realized that she might be the only person currently aware of a developing crisis that could affect national security. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. Lieutenant Commander Hayes continued his paperwork, oblivious to the drama unfolding at Sarah's station. The other operators went about their routine duties, monitoring their assigned frequencies and processing standard communications traffic. None of them realized that a few feet away, their youngest and most overlooked colleague was handling what might be the most important transmission any of them would ever encounter. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the secure phone that would connect her directly to Naval Command. She knew that making this call would change everything. Once she reported the transmission, there would be no going back. The situation would escalate rapidly through the chain of command, and she would be at the center of whatever followed. But as she listened to another update from the calm, professional voice on the emergency frequency, Sarah knew she had no choice. Someone out there was counting on her to be their link to help, and she wouldn't let them down. She lifted the secure phone and began dialing the number that would connect her to the duty officer at Pacific Fleet Command. The voice in the static had trusted her with information that could save lives. Now it was time to prove that their trust hadn't been misplaced. Sarah took a deep breath and prepared to make the call that would transform her from an overlooked junior operator into the critical link in a chain of events that would reach the highest levels of Naval Command. The secure phone rang twice before a crisp voice answered, "Pacific Fleet Command, duty officer." Sarah's mouth went dry. "This is Petty Officer Chen at Communications Station 7. I need to report a priority emergency transmission from an unknown call sign requesting immediate assistance." There was a pause that seemed to last forever. "Stand by." While waiting for the duty officer to return, Sarah continued monitoring the emergency frequency. The mysterious voice came through again, providing updated coordinates and additional details about the developing situation. Her professionalism never wavered, but Sarah could detect subtle signs of increased urgency in her tone. Whatever was happening out there was getting worse. "Petty Officer Chen, this is Commander Rodriguez. I need you to provide complete details of this transmission immediately." Sarah launched into a detailed briefing, reading from her carefully maintained logs. She provided the call sign, coordinates, timeline of communications, and all information gathered about the emergency. Commander Rodriguez listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification on specific technical details.
"Have you confirmed this transmission with your supervising officer?" Rodriguez asked.
Sarah glanced across the room at Lieutenant Commander Hayes, still absorbed in his paperwork. "No, sir. The transmission is ongoing, and I felt immediate notification to Fleet Command was the priority." Another pause. "You made the right call, Petty Officer. Maintain contact with that frequency and record everything. I'm escalating this immediately. Do not discuss this with anyone until further notice." The line went dead, leaving Sarah alone with the weight of what she had just set in motion. Within minutes, she heard the familiar sound of Lieutenant Commander Hayes' phone ringing. She watched as his expression changed from mild annoyance to sharp attention, then to something approaching alarm. He ended the call and strode quickly to Sarah's station. "Chen, I need a complete briefing on this emergency transmission you've been monitoring," he said. His usual dismissive tone replaced by focused intensity. Sarah walked him through everything, playing back recorded segments of the transmissions. Hayes listened carefully, taking notes and occasionally asking technical questions that showed he was finally recognizing the significance of what she had discovered. For the first time since she had been assigned to his shift, he was treating her as a competent professional rather than an inconvenience. "How long have you been tracking this signal?" he asked. "Approximately 90 minutes, sir. The initial transmissions were very weak and difficult to isolate, but the caller has been providing consistent updates on what appears to be a multi-vessel emergency situation." Hayes nodded grimly. "Fleet Command is sending a priority response team to investigate the coordinates you provided. They want you to maintain primary contact with this unknown caller. I'm reassigning all other operators to cover your normal duties. Your only responsibility now is that emergency frequency." As word of the situation spread through the communications center, Sarah found herself at the center of unprecedented attention. Senior officers who had never spoken to her before were asking detailed questions about the transmission characteristics and her assessment of the caller's credibility. Equipment specialists arrived to enhance her station's capabilities and ensure optimal signal quality. The transformation was remarkable. The same people who had dismissed her as an inexperienced junior operator were now hanging on her every word. But Sarah remained focused on her primary responsibility, maintaining contact with the voice that had started everything. The mysterious caller continued providing regular updates, each transmission demonstrating remarkable composure under what were obviously deteriorating conditions. She reported changing weather patterns, equipment failures, and personnel status with the precision of someone who had been trained to function effectively in crisis situations. Sarah found herself developing a deep respect for this unknown woman who seemed to be handling an extraordinary emergency with such professional competence. It was during one of these routine check-ins that everything changed again. The caller's signal suddenly strengthened dramatically, suggesting either improved equipment or proximity to a relay station. With this enhanced signal quality, her voice came through with crystal clarity, and Sarah heard something that made her blood run cold. The call sign the woman was using wasn't just unfamiliar to the current operation databases. It was a call sign that had been retired 20 years earlier, following a classified incident that had resulted in multiple casualties and the permanent deactivation of an entire special operations unit. Sarah's access to historical records was limited, but she knew enough to understand that something was very wrong. She immediately contacted Commander Rodriguez with this new information. His response was swift and decisive. Within minutes, Sarah's station was surrounded by intelligence officers, communication specialists, and senior naval personnel who had arrived from throughout the base. The routine operations of the communications center ground to a halt as everyone focused on the mystery of the impossible call sign. Admiral James Harrison received the emergency briefing while he was reviewing fleet readiness reports in his private office at Pacific Fleet Command. At 58 years old, he was a veteran of 4 decades of naval service and had commanded operations in every major theater. Very little surprised him anymore, but the report he was hearing challenged everything he thought he knew about current naval operations. "Are we certain about this call sign identification?" he asked the intelligence briefing officer. "Yes, sir. Cross-checked against all current and recent operational codes. The call sign belongs to Operation Deep Current, which was terminated in 2004 following a classified incident. All personnel were reassigned, and the operation was permanently deactivated." Admiral Harrison felt a chill of recognition. He had been a young commander 20 years earlier when Operation Deep Current had ended in tragedy. 3 vessels had been lost, along with their crews, during what should have been a routine training exercise. The incident had been classified at the highest levels, and the families of the lost personnel had been told their loved ones died in an equipment accident during a standard patrol. "I want a direct connection to that communication station immediately," Harrison ordered. "And I want complete historical files on Operation Deep Current pulled from classified archives. Something is happening out there that shouldn't be possible." Back at the communications center, Sarah found herself speaking directly to Admiral Harrison himself. The conversation was brief but intense, with the Admiral asking specific questions about the transmission characteristics and the caller's apparent knowledge of naval procedures. Sarah answered as completely as possible, unaware that her responses were helping to solve a 20-year-old mystery. "Petty Officer Chen, I need you to ask this caller a specific question," Admiral Harrison instructed. "Ask her to identify the commanding officer of her operation. Don't accept any evasive answers. I need a name." Sarah keyed her microphone with hands that had begun to shake. "Unknown caller, this is Communications Station 7. Please identify your commanding officer for coordination with fleet response." The response came immediately, and the name that emerged from her speakers caused Admiral Harrison to sink into his chair as if he had been physically struck. The caller had identified Commander Elena Vasquez as her commanding officer, the same Commander Vasquez who had been presumed dead for 20 years along with her entire crew. "That's impossible," Harrison whispered. "Elena Vasquez died in 2004. I attended her memorial service." But the voice on the radio continued, providing details about Operation Deep Current that only someone who had been there could know. She described equipment configurations, personnel assignments, and operational procedures that had never been documented in any accessible files. Either someone had gained access to the most classified information in naval archives, or the impossible was happening. Admiral Harrison made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. He ordered an immediate high-priority search and rescue operation to the coordinates provided by the mysterious caller. Every available vessel in the area was diverted to investigate what might be nothing more than an elaborate hoax, but which could potentially be the most significant discovery in naval history. The response was massive. 2 destroyers changed course immediately, their crews preparing for emergency rescue operations. A helicopter squadron launched from the nearest carrier, equipped with advanced search and rescue equipment. Coast Guard cutters joined the effort, bringing medical personnel and specialized recovery equipment. As the rescue fleet converged on the coordinates, Sarah maintained constant contact with the mysterious caller. The voice remained calm and professional, coordinating with the incoming rescue units and providing detailed information about their situation. Her knowledge of rescue procedures was flawless, and her ability to manage complex logistics under pressure was extraordinary. But with each transmission, the mystery deepened. The caller was describing conditions and circumstances that seemed to match exactly what had happened 20 years earlier during the original Operation Deep Current incident. Weather patterns, equipment failures, and tactical situations all aligned with classified reports that had been sealed since 2004. Admiral Harrison found himself confronting the possibility that everything he had believed about that tragic day 20 years ago might have been wrong. The official report had concluded that the 3 vessels had been destroyed by a catastrophic equipment failure that left no survivors. But if this transmission was genuine, at least one crew had somehow survived for 2 decades in circumstances that defied explanation. The first rescue vessel reached the coordinates just as the sun was setting. The destroyer's captain immediately reported visual contact with what appeared to be 3 vessels matching the description provided by the mysterious caller. But something was wrong with the visual confirmation. The ships appeared to be intact, but they seemed somehow insubstantial, visible one moment and nearly transparent the next. "Admiral, This is Captain Morrison on the destroyer Wellington. I'm looking at 3 vessels at the provided coordinates, but I've never seen anything like this. The ships are here, but they're not entirely solid. My radar shows intermittent contacts, and my crew is reporting that the vessels seem to fade in and out of visibility. Admiral Harrison stared at the radio in his command center, trying to process information that challenged everything he understood about reality. Captain Morrison, can you establish visual contact with personnel on those vessels? Yes, sir. I can see crew members on deck. They appear to be signaling for assistance, but, Admiral, these people look exactly like the crew photos from Operation Deep Current. They haven't aged a day. The implications hit Admiral Harrison like a physical blow. Somehow, impossibly, Commander Elena Vasquez and her crew had been trapped in some kind of temporal anomaly for 20 years, experiencing the same emergency over and over again. The voice Sarah had been hearing wasn't just any naval officer. It was the ghost of his former colleague, finally able to break through whatever barrier had held her for 2 decades. As rescue operations commenced, Sarah continued to serve as the primary communications link between the impossible vessels and the rescue fleet. The mysterious caller, who Sarah now knew was Commander Vasquez herself, coordinated the complex rescue operation with the same skill and professionalism she had demonstrated throughout her distinguished career. The young petty officer who had been ignored and dismissed by her colleagues had become the crucial link in solving one of the Navy's greatest mysteries. Her attention to unusual signals, her refusal to dismiss what others might have ignored, and her professional competence under pressure had made possible the rescue of personnel who had been lost for 20 years. But the story was far from over. As the rescue ships approached the mysterious vessels, new questions arose about the nature of the temporal anomaly and whether the rescued personnel could safely return to normal time. Admiral Harrison realized that Sarah Chen would continue to play a crucial role in whatever came next. Her unique connection to Commander Vasquez making her indispensable to understanding and resolving this unprecedented situation. The rescue operation that followed was unlike anything in naval history. As the rescue ships approached the coordinates, the 3 vessels from Operation Deep Current gradually became more solid and visible, as if Sarah's successful communication had somehow anchored them to present reality. Commander Elena Vasquez, looking exactly as she had 20 years earlier, stood on the bridge of her vessel and coordinated the most complex rescue operation of Admiral Harrison's career. Sarah found herself at the center of a phenomenon that challenged every scientific and military protocol. The mysterious temporal anomaly that had trapped Commander Vasquez and her crew was slowly dissolving, but the process was fragile and required constant communication to maintain stability. Every few minutes, the rescued vessels would begin to fade again, and only Sarah's voice on the emergency frequency could bring them back to full visibility. Sarah, you're our anchor to this time. Commander Vasquez explained during one of their radio conversations. For 20 years, we've been trapped in a loop, experiencing the same emergency over and over. Your ability to hear us through the interference was the first time anyone has been able to establish sustained contact. Without you maintaining that connection, we'll slip back into the anomaly. The scientific implications were staggering. Teams of researchers, physicists, and naval intelligence specialists descended on the communication center to study the phenomenon. Sarah's station became the focal point for understanding how a temporal displacement event could occur and how communication technology might interact with such anomalies. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, a quantum physicist with top-secret clearance, spent hours analyzing the transmission characteristics that had allowed Sarah to make initial contact. The frequency patterns you detected are unlike anything we've ever recorded, she explained to Sarah. Whatever caused this temporal displacement created a unique electromagnetic signature. Your equipment happened to be precisely calibrated to detect it, but more importantly, your training allowed you to recognize the pattern as artificial rather than natural interference. Admiral Harrison maintained constant oversight of the operation, but he increasingly relied on Sarah's unique connection to Commander Vasquez. The young petty officer who had been overlooked and undervalued just days earlier was now providing real-time briefings to the highest levels of naval command. Her professional competence and calm demeanor under extraordinary pressure impressed everyone who worked with her. The rescue process itself took nearly 18 hours. Each of the 3 vessels from Operation Deep Current had to be carefully guided back to normal time, with Sarah maintaining constant radio contact to prevent them from slipping back into the temporal loop. The crews who had experienced the same day hundreds of times over the past 20 years were understandably disoriented as they gradually became aware that 2 decades had passed in the outside world. Commander Vasquez proved to be exactly the professional Admiral Harrison remembered, adapting quickly to the incredible circumstances and focusing on the safety of her personnel. Her leadership during the transition was flawless, helping her crew understand their situation while maintaining operational discipline during the complex rescue procedure. Elena, how were you able to break through after 20 years? Admiral Harrison asked during a secure video call once the first vessel had been successfully stabilized in present time. "We've been trying to signal for help since the day we became trapped," Commander Vasquez replied. But something about the electromagnetic environment we were trapped in made communication nearly impossible. Most of our transmissions never made it past the temporal barrier. It wasn't until this morning that someone with the right combination of equipment, training, and intuition was finally able to hear us and respond effectively. She looked directly into the camera. "Admiral, that petty officer saved not just our lives, but our sanity. 20 years of experiencing the same emergency, the same fear, the same desperation over and over again. We were beginning to lose hope that anyone would ever hear us. As the rescued personnel were brought aboard the rescue vessels, medical teams made remarkable discoveries. Despite being trapped for 20 years, none of the crew had aged a single day. Their medical conditions were exactly what they had been at the moment of displacement. This finding opened up entirely new fields of research into the nature of time, consciousness, and human physiology. Sarah continued to serve as the primary communications coordinator throughout the extended rescue operation. Her ability to maintain contact with the displaced vessels proved crucial not just for the rescue itself, but for gathering scientific data about the temporal anomaly. Every conversation she had with Commander Vasquez provided new insights into the experience of temporal displacement and the conditions that had made rescue possible. The intelligence implications were equally significant. Operation Deep Current had been classified because it involved testing experimental communication equipment that was far ahead of its time. The temporal displacement appeared to be connected to that experimental technology, raising questions about other classified projects and whether similar incidents might have occurred elsewhere. Admiral Harrison found himself re-evaluating everything he thought he knew about the incident 20 years earlier. "We concluded that the vessels had been destroyed because we couldn't detect any traces of them," he explained to the investigative team. "We never considered that they might have been displaced in time rather than destroyed." The technology to even conceive of such a possibility didn't exist in 2004. 3 weeks after the initial contact, all personnel from Operation Deep Current had been successfully rescued and stabilized in present time. The temporal anomaly had completely dissolved, leaving no trace of its existence except for the detailed records Sarah had maintained throughout the entire event. Her logs became the foundation for a new understanding of temporal physics and communication theory. Commander Vasquez, after extensive debriefing and medical evaluation, requested a meeting with Sarah. They met in a secure conference room at Pacific Fleet Command. The first time they had seen each other face-to-face despite their crucial radio partnership. "I needed to thank you personally," Commander Vasquez said, shaking Sarah's hand. "Your professionalism, your attention to detail, and your refusal to dismiss what others might have ignored saved 47 lives. But more than that, you gave us back our future." Sarah, still somewhat overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had occurred, replied quietly, "I just did my job, ma'am. I was trained to listen to everything and treat every transmission as potentially important. That training and your natural instincts made all the difference. In our 20 years of being trapped, we sent thousands of distress calls. You were the first person who heard us, really heard us, and took action." The aftermath of the Operation Deep Current rescue transformed Sarah's career and life in ways she never could have imagined. Admiral Harrison personally recommended her for immediate promotion and transfer to a specialized communications unit that dealt with unusual phenomena. Her expertise in temporal anomaly communications became legendary within certain classified circles. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, who had dismissed Sarah for months, submitted a formal commendation acknowledging that her professionalism and initiative had resulted in one of the most significant rescues in naval history. Petty Officer Chen demonstrated exactly the kind of attention to detail and dedication to duty that represents the best of naval tradition, he wrote in his report. The other operators who had worked alongside Sarah without really seeing her began to understand how much they had missed. Her ability to detect patterns in background noise, her meticulous record-keeping, and her professional competence had been there all along. They had simply failed to recognize the exceptional talent working beside them every day. Dr. Morgan's research team published classified papers on temporal communications theory based on Sarah's logs and observations. Petty Officer Chan's documentation of the initial contact and subsequent communications provides the only existing record of sustained contact with a temporal displacement phenomenon, Dr. Morgan noted in her conclusions. Her technical observations and professional communication protocols established the foundation for an entirely new field of scientific research. Commander Vasquez, after completing her debriefing and reintegration process, accepted a position as a special advisor on temporal phenomena for naval intelligence. Her experience and knowledge became invaluable for understanding other unexplained incidents that had occurred over the years. She worked closely with Sarah on developing new protocols for detecting and responding to similar anomalies. The equipment modifications that allowed Sarah to initially detect the displaced signals were implemented throughout the Naval Communications Network. Training programs were developed to help operators recognize unusual patterns that might indicate temporal displacement or other extraordinary phenomena. Sarah became an instructor in these programs, sharing her experience with new generations of communications specialists. Admiral Harrison reflected on the incident during his final years of service before retirement. The most important lesson from Operation Deep Current isn't about temporal anomalies or advanced physics, he said during a classified briefing. It's about recognizing talent and dedication wherever it appears. Sarah Chen was performing exceptional work every day, but it took an unprecedented crisis for us to notice. How many other exceptional people do we overlook because they don't fit our preconceptions? The investigation into the original temporal displacement led to discoveries about experimental technology that had been ahead of its time in 2004. Researchers found evidence that similar anomalies might have occurred in other locations, leading to expanded research programs and new safety protocols for advanced technology testing. Sarah's role in these discoveries continued to grow as she became one of the world's leading experts on temporal communication phenomena. 5 years after the rescue, Sarah had achieved the rank of lieutenant and commanded her own specialized communications unit. Her team was responsible for monitoring unusual electromagnetic phenomena worldwide and maintaining readiness to respond to temporal displacement events. The quiet young woman who had been ignored and dismissed had become one of the most respected professionals in her field. Commander Vasquez, despite the strange circumstances of her rescue, successfully reintegrated into modern naval service and became a mentor to junior officers throughout the fleet. Her experience of being trapped in time had given her unique insights into leadership, perseverance, and the importance of never giving up hope, even in seemingly impossible situations. The friendship between Sarah and Elena, forged through radio transmissions across an impossible barrier, remained strong throughout their continued service. They had shared an experience that no one else could fully understand, and that bond had created a professional partnership that continued to benefit the Navy for years to come. In her final report on the Operation Deep Current rescue, Sarah wrote, "The most important lesson I learned is that every voice deserves to be heard, and every signal deserves attention. We never know when someone who seems ordinary might be capable of extraordinary things, or when a routine day might become the most important day of our careers." The voice that changed everything was always there, waiting for someone to listen carefully enough to hear it. The story of how no one paid attention to her until an admiral froze when he heard her call sign became a legend within naval communications. It reminded everyone that the most important voices are often the ones that speak quietly, and the most significant discoveries come from those who pay attention to what others dismiss. Sarah Chen had proven that excellence isn't always loud, but it's always worth recognizing when it finally reveals itself.